yogis, so this is our second part to our 3-part hamstring series that I'm filming. This is going to be like a bite-sized stretching video. So I'm also going to be doing the restorative video, which is going to be focusing more on mobility. We're going to do some fascia focusing in that, do some longer holds, get into the spine quite a bit, as well as the hamstrings. This is going to be straight up muscular. This is just muscular stretching, a bite-sized video that you can do every day if you want. I wouldn't recommend doing this after the yoga practice because we're going to be doing a lot of similar postures and some long holds, and I don't want you to overdo it, and I talk about that in that video, that we just don't want to overdo the hamstrings. But this would be something you could do on off days or when you just don't have time for a full yoga sequence, but you also want something a little bit more energizing than the restorative that we're going to be doing later. So let's go ahead and get started. I would like you to have 2 blocks today. If you don't have blocks, of course, you know you can use something else. You can use a couple cases of White Claws or a couple books or DVD collections, whatever you have. We're going to begin standing. So standing at the front of your mat, feet hip-width distance apart, hands to hips, inhale. Exhale, forward fold. So go ahead and bring your hands to the mat. If you're a little bit higher up, then go ahead and bring your hands to blocks just to help support your upper body. And we talk about this in the vinyasa sequence, so I'm not going to water dead flower here. But I want your spine to be lengthened. So even if you're here and you're feeling really tight, I want you to stay here with your spine long. You can bend the knees, which is going to help lengthen that low back. You can watch my low back and see that when you bend the knees, you're able to get that tilt of the tailbone upwards, and you're able to get more length in the hamstrings and the low back. So I'd rather you be here with a little bit of lumbar curve and a little bit of a forward pull of the heart than have you here with legs straight and spine really rounded. We're really focusing on the hamstrings and the low back. So again, I'd rather you have knees bent, tailbone tilted up, and then folding forward as much as you can in that upper body than being here with really straight legs and a round spine. Those of you who have a little bit more depth, you can bring fingertips to the mat, soften the knees. They don't have to be straight in order for you to feel stretched. In fact, oftentimes a little bit of a bend can bring a little bit more of a tensile quality to your stretch and can actually feel a little bit more intense. But again, we're focusing on that length of the low back. So even though I'm pretty flexible in the hamstrings, I'm a little sore today. My low back is rounding a little bit more than normal. So I'm going to go ahead and actively kind of tilt my tailbone up just a touch, and that's already gives a lot deeper of a stretch here. Gonna let the head hang, and then let your weight go forward more into the toes, just enough to where you kind of feel that sense of balance kick on, you feel your belly kick on. And then these next few breaths, let's ask for some reinforcement. Let's use our outer hips. So maintaining everything that you're doing right now, I want you to press the knife edges, so the pinky toe sides of your feet to the edges of your mat. Like you're trying to tear your mat in half, that space that's in between your feet, but only a touch. You may feel like your glutes are separating or like your sits bones are separating. Your sits bones are not separating, they're fused, but your glutes are separating, and that's what we want. So now we're asking our outer hips to become part of this stretch. Good, my hamstrings are talking really loud, so it's okay if yours are too. Let's take a couple more breaths, weight forward. Good, inhale. And then exhale. Bend the knees nice and deep, lift the heels, come to a little squat. Okay, we're just going to rest here for a moment. So we're letting now the hamstrings contract. We're letting them kind of smush and relax before going to our next stretch. The next one we're going to do is standing splits, which I know is pretty much everyone's least favorite yoga pose. But standing splits is one of the best things you can do for your hamstrings because the leg that you're folding over is weight-bearing 100%, and a weight-bearing forward fold is going to be much more effective than a seated forward fold or a reclined forward fold. And then you also have the floating leg, and that floating hamstring is working really hard on elevating. Good. Hopefully your hamstrings feel a little bit relaxed now. Let's come back to our forward fold, legs straight, and keep the spine long. Again, use your blocks on any height as much as you need to notice my low back here. Keep that slight tilt of the low back, just a little bit. That's what's going to help us get a little bit more range in the low back fascia, okay? So for standing splits, I'm going to bring my hands to the mat because that's where I'm comfortable, but hands can be on blocks. Lean into your right leg and sweep your left leg back and up. Don't worry about coming into the splits. Think more of a T shape. And then just like before, I want you to think about that spine long. I want your tailbone to lift just slightly. And then take an inhale. Exhale, fold over your front leg as much as you comfortably can. Now, my hamstrings are not only sore from doing Pilates the last few days, but from just instructing the hour sequence. So I'm going to stay a little bit lower today. But for those of you who can, I want you to, and by lower I mean my floating leg, for those of you who can, I want you to keep your left leg really straight, like really push out your toes. Try and get your leg physically longer, and then lift from that left hamstring. Good, so here we're not just thinking about the forward fold, we're really thinking about the lift of that floating leg, okay? We won't be here too long. Let the head relax. Look behind you rather than forward. If you look forward, your heart's going to be pulled forward, which is good for spine length, but it can decrease the amount that you fold. I want you to think about pulling your heart to your toes. Rather than pulling your heart to the front of your mat, pull your heart to your toes. Look behind you. Good. Lift that floating leg a little bit higher. Bring your weight a little bit more into your toes. Take an inhale. Exhale, lower your left foot down to meet the right. Sit into a squat. Let the heels lift. Good. Let's just take a moment here. Whew. Good. So again, today's practice, we're just getting into the hamstrings. I know I've been preaching how much that low back fascia can really restrict hamstrings in the pelvis. That's going to be more in the restorative video. This is going to be straight up. We're just targeting those hamstrings here. Okay, let's go ahead and go into the left leg. Straighten out your legs. Fingertips wherever is comfortable. Blocks are the mat. Look down and behind you, and then push through your left foot as you sweep your right leg behind you and up. Again, don't worry about making the splits pose. This is called standing splits. There's a really stupid name for this pose. While that's our intention, most people cannot do the splits in this pose. But if you are trying to do the splits, if the splits is your long-term goal, this is the pose you want to practice. Because if you can do the splits while resisting gravity, then you will be able to do the splits on the ground. Good. So sink your weight a little bit more forward into those left toes. Again, pull your heart towards your foot and look behind you rather than pulling your heart forward. You want to enhance the integrity of the fold and not look like you're going to go into a handstand. And then as much as you can, push through your right toes. I like to point the foot. If you want to flex, you can flex. I like to point the toes. Push through your foot. Push, 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 push. And then lift a little bit higher. Woo! So that right hamstring is burning, lifting that leg. And that left leg is maybe burning as well as it's flexing. Got a couple more breaths. Gotta lift that right leg high. Gotta weight more forward in the toes, lean. Got one more inhale. Lower the right leg down. Sink into a squat. Nice and slow, nice and slow. Okay. All right, so let's come down to our knees. You're probably expecting knee stretches. These are great for the splits and the hamstrings. Let's bring our right foot forward to start. Right heel on the mat, ball of the foot and toes slightly off. So your foot's at a 45 degrees. Hands to your instep, and then lift your back leg up. Good, so we're gonna start active. We're gonna keep that back leg lifted, lift the back of the knee up towards the sky. Pull your heart forward. Push down through your front heel. Good. Take an inhale. Back leg should be straight. You can see how my back heel is stacked over the toes. Push through your heel, inhale. And then lower the knee down exactly where it is. So now you're in a super stretched, long stance here. You can see now you're able to get that nice length in the low back. You're able to kind of get that anterior forward tilt of the pelvis. Good, let's take a couple breaths here. So we're getting that nice lengthening of the front of the hip and getting some flexion of the front of the hip. Now again, this isn't necessarily like super targeting the hamstrings, but in terms of getting mobility in the legs, this is a forward fold. This is flexion of that right hip. And you need to be able to flex that right hip in order to forward fold, as forward fold is flexion. Good. Walk your right foot back in between your hands. And then sink your hip back over your back knee. So we're not back here. Look forward. This is not where we are. You want your hip over that back knee. Otherwise, you're going to get really tired. I like to use blocks here. And then flex your front foot so that your toes are directly over your heel of that front foot. Draw your shoulders back. Pull your heart forward just as we've been doing. Take an inhale. Bend your front knee. Push your front heel down, drag your front heel to the back of your mat, 10%, super small amount. Good. Pull your heart forward. Think about getting that arch in the low back, not an exaggerated one, but just rather than being roundy here, just a nice curve of the low back. Keep that. Re-straighten the front knee as much as it can. It might still be bent, that's okay. And then forward fold. So you'll notice we're not holding any of these poses too long. We're not in them for 2, 3, 4 minutes at a time. I think that's just over the top for the hamstrings. We're doing about 30 seconds to a minute, not too long. Good. I want you to still think about pressing through that front heel and pulling the heart forward. So it's like your hips are trying to go back and your chest is trying to go forward. We're still trying to find that freedom in the low back, in that lumbar fascia. As more mobility in the pelvis is going to give us more mobility in the hamstrings. Good. Let's take one more breath in. Exhale. Rebend your front knee. Plant the foot down nice and slow. Sink forward again. Always being intelligent on the dismounts. Rise up to a nice little low lunge. Good. So here, again, the goal of this practice is not the splits, it's just the hamstrings, but this is a really good stretch for the splits, is to work on those hip flexors. But we're still getting some really good flexion of that right hip, which is what we want in a forward fold. It's a flexion movement. So just a couple breaths here just to release the hamstring. Good. And then press your weight back over that back knee. Come back to like a tabletop position. Whoo boy, very good. Okay, other foot. Step your left foot forward. Coming into that lizard lunge again. Left heel on the mat, left toes off the mat. Palms down. Tuck your back toes, straighten your back leg, and then wiggle that leg back as far as it can go to where your heel is stacked over your toes and you're able to push through the toes. Look at my leg. Rather than hanging and being bent here, you're going to really push and try and straighten it out. So you're using some energy of that hamstring, of that glute to lift that leg. Take an inhale. And then slowly just let the knee bend and plop down. You can, of course, I forgot to mention on the other side, your mat or a blanket or a pillow. Good. Just a couple breaths, letting the hips be really heavy in this lunge. Just bringing up my timer here. And then walk your hands up. Bring your foot back to the center of your mat. I'm going to take my blocks with me because I love using my blocks here. And then coming back into Ardha Hanuman, half splits. Front foot flexed so that your toes are over your heel. We don't want this. We want to access the calf muscle as well. Hands directly under the shoulders, whether they're on blocks or a mat, back hip over the back knee. Flex your foot. Inhale, lengthen the heart. Bend your front knee. So it's like you're trying to bring your thigh to your belly. And you can see how much of a nice forward tilt I have in my pelvis here for this fold. That's what's going to help give me that length in my hamstring. Then I'm going to push down through my front heel. So now I feel my hamstring, especially where it connects at the gluteal fold. I feel that engaged. That's what I want. I want that area to be really strong. And then I'm going to push my heel down, drag the heel towards the back of my mat just a tiny, tiny bit, and then re-straighten my leg if that's possible for you. Okay? Then either stay here if you feel enough stretch. Remember, blocks can also be on a higher setting. I'd rather you be here with the spine long and proud, heart tall, getting that nice kind of light lumbar curve, than have you be here. Be lower and really rounded and stuck. And then we'll take a few breaths here, about 8 to 10 breaths. Still keeping that integrity of that hamstring engagement, pushing down through the heel, as we don't want to feel any stabbing or tearing or a lot of sensation at the top where the hamstring connects here or where the hamstring connects at the knee. We want to feel it, the belly of the hamstring. Good. Try and resist the urge to drop the head, keep it supported. Pull the heart forward. Remember, you're still thinking about that slight arch of the low back, which is going to help us find some freedom. If that bothers the hamstring connection point, then don't stress about it. Or bend the knee a little bit. Let's take one more breath in. Good. On your exhale, I want you to ease off the stretch. Bend the knee nice and slow. This side always feels a lot, more stretched to me after, so I always go really slow on this side. Come back to your really nice heavy lunge. I like to imagine like there's weights of sand like strapped to my hips, pulling me down, nice and heavy. Good. Come back to a tabletop position. Set your blocks aside. Press yourself up to stand. All right, I'm going to do just a little bit more. We're going to turn towards the long edge of our mat. Toes in, heels out so that the feet are parallel, hands to hips. Inhale. Exhale, forward fold, wide leg, forward fold. So in this one, we're getting a little bit more into the inner thighs. So I'm going to walk my feet out just a little bit wider so I can feel more of that inner thigh stretch. And then tilt your weight more into your heels, tilt more of your weight into your toes, weight forward so that your hips line up with your heels. Good. Let's take just a few breaths here. Same thing as before, we want to think about that long spine, that kind of arching of the low back. If we keep the spine rigid, the hamstrings are going to be stuck. The hamstrings connect to the base of the pelvis. If the pelvis is rigid, the hamstrings are going to be rigid. So think about that tilt up. And I know in yoga so often I talk about not doing that. I talk about neutral spine. But for so many people who have really, really, really stubborn hamstrings, the culprit can be the low back. The culprit can be that the pelvis does not want to tilt forward. Good. On your next inhale, walk your hands up. Start to walk your feet a little bit closer. Soften the knees. Hands to hips. Push down to rise up. All right. That is it for our targeted hamstring stretching class. Just about 20 or so minutes of focused stretching for the hamstrings. This is exactly what I'd have you do every single day if you were working on hamstring mobility. If you still have time and you'd like to, you can throw in a couple hip openers here, our 90-90 pigeon pose, or if you're comfortable in pigeon, malasana squat. Those are also really good postures to help find a little bit more mobility, as well as any side bends. But just in terms of just finding some hamstring flexibility, this is all you need. That's all you need. Just 20 minutes of this, about 30-second to a minute holds. Be consistent rather than aggressive. That's all I can say, and that's my best advice. Thank you all so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Namaste.